Well, the United Nations judges at the International Court of Justice will announce a ruling on South Africa's request for emergency measures against Israel, which is accused of state-led genocide for its military operation in a Palestinian enclave of Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas says the International Court of Justice issues a ruling calling for a ceasefire. The Palestinian movement will abide by it as long as Israel reciprocates. At a news conference in Beirut, senior Hamas official Osama Hamdan said all the Israeli hostages in Gaza would be released if Israel releases all Palestinian prisoners. For the latest on this, from The Hague now, we are joined by SABC News correspondent Stuart Smith. Stuart, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. So the world is watching this ruling with bated breath. Is there any indication of which direction the ruling could go?
No, there isn't at the moment. Speaking to international lawyers that have been part of cases like this one in the past, they're uncertain. The test here, remember, is not whether Israel has committed genocide in Gaza, it's whether there is a plausible option, a plausible scenario that Israel could be engaged in genocide. And then the second test is whether emergency measures would need to be imposed, as South Africa has suggested. Once that ruling has been made by the court, this decision is mandatory under international law. Israel would have to follow its ruling, but has largely indicated it would not, which means enforcement may end up requiring the United Nations Security Council to get involved, which comes with its own complications, because it's likely the United States would veto any resolution that called for Israel to take part in a ceasefire. This does change the game slightly, with the stakes increased, with Hamas saying they would participate in a ceasefire, though a big caveat there that they would require Israel to release political prisoners as well. And so it's likely that when this judgment does come out in a few hours' time, probably if it's going against Israel, it's unlikely to follow what the ICJ has ruled. On the other hand, the ICJ could ask for something different to a ceasefire. It could suggest, for example, that other measures must be taken by Israel to improve the humanitarian situation, which perhaps may be something Israel can agree to, but it's largely dismissed the role of the ICJ when it comes to its, as it sees it, its military operation in Gaza.
Yeah. So Hamas saying that they will abide by that ruling if it does call for a ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu, a couple of days after the court actually heard the application from South Africa, said that no one will stop us, not the Hague, not the axis of evil, and not anyone else. But has there been anything else that has come from the Israeli government around this decision that is expected today?
Yeah, that's the main one. So Israel says that it is effectively defending itself, and that's key here, in that this is a trial about international law, not necessarily about ethics or morals. Israel is leveraging its right to self-defense under Article 51. It says that Hamas is an ongoing threat and has threatened Israel again. That claim is one of the issues that the ICJ will be looking at, because Israel would say that if it's forced into a ceasefire, effectively the ICJ is asking it to surrender to Hamas, which is something that for it is untenable. Similarly, the United States has said that it believes that the South African case being brought to the ICJ is misguided under that banner of genocide.
What are some of the pundits telling you about the argument that has been brought forward by Israel that a dispute has not been established between South Africa as well as Israel, which of course was the argument that they put before the ICJ as well?
Yeah, when it comes to that technical legal point, lawyers I've spoken to haven't suggested that's likely to get in the way of any ruling. The ICJ, with its 15 judges and 2 extra in this case from South Africa and Israel, have accepted the case, and there's been no indication that a technical reason like that would get in the way of this. Having said that, this is, as every case is, on its own merits, being decided at the highest level here by the World Court, so it's possible, but not speaking to lawyers I've heard have suggested that that's going to get in the way.
So what do you expect at 2 o'clock? How does it play out in that court?
Yeah, so what will happen is the reading will be made about, first of all, whether the ICJ can accept this case under the Genocide Convention. If that is the case, it will then lay out whether any of the charges by South Africa, the 9 charges, should stand. With that, the ICJ also has the option to not necessarily take what South African prosecutors have suggested. It could instead suggest its own measures, for example, saying that Israel has to follow international law or take other measures to avoid humanitarian suffering in Gaza. This process could take a while to go through the rationale of all the judgments made, or it also could be the case that if the ICJ has decided that the initial claim is not applicable under that genocide law under the United Nations, it could be a pretty fast proceeding, but we are expecting comment instantly as soon as the ruling has been made from including Israel and South Africa. We're also expecting other states to weigh in, those states that could become incredibly important if it does end up at the United Nations Security Council, the United States, UK, France, China and Russia, how they would see this and whether they're willing to get involved in order to try to enforce the ICJ judgment, if indeed the judgment does require enforcement.
And Stuart, whichever way the court judgment goes, what happens after that? Because remember, here we're dealing with the provisional measures that South Africa is asking for, the emergency measures, but there is still the main application which deals with the allegations of genocide against Israel.
That's absolutely right. So this case has been brought forward because it's urgent and because the request relates to preliminary measures, a very fast timescale for these kinds of international institutions, just 2 weeks. But the actual case itself is expected to take years. And one of the measures suggested by South African prosecutors that these judges could decide to apply is that Israel is forbidden from destroying any evidence which could be relevant in that case over the next few years, to make sure that the IDF soldiers fighting in Gaza, the command, the politicians enacting this military operation do not attempt to hide what later could be crucial evidence in a case relating to genocide that would also take place here, but at a much slower timescale.
Just quickly, Stuart, I saw that the ICJ next week, this is on Wednesday, will also hand down judgment on the case against Ukraine versus the Russian Federation. What do you know about that?
Yeah, that's right. So this is a similar case in that it's also relating to the world's highest court. It's similar also that Russia has ignored the ruling in a way that it's expected Israel will as well, showing the limits of international decisions at this place. But what it did do for Russia and Ukraine was it created a lot of political pressure, and states often would refer to that ruling at the ICJ as an unbiased court when it comes to the United Nations realm of international politics, to say, look, Russia, this court has ruled as such and therefore also needs to stop. So a ceasefire was called for in that Russian invasion of Ukraine. Again, preliminary measures. What this judgment will be is that later analysis over that longer timescale with a decision. But at the moment, don't know what that will be.
Thank you so much. That is our SABC News correspondent there, Stuart Smith.